Yes, good evening. Welcome to Red Corner Boxing with me, Mr. Neutral. This channel is sponsored by EasyStorage.com. Check them out in the bio for all your local and nationwide needs. Yes, so welcome to the Fighter Series show. And this week we will be covering Mr. Christopher Livingston Eubank. And yes, we'll start. Christopher Livingston Eubank was born on 8th of August 1966 in Dulwich, South London, to his Jamaican mother, Rachel Scollins. 2 months later, however, as a young baby, the family returned to Jamaica until he was 6 years old. Then he moved back to London and settled in various places in Hackney and Peckham. And as he was growing up with his older brothers and that, by the age of 16, he'd been expelled 18 times in 1 year and ultimately banned from school. His father's had enough. He wants to send him to America to his mother, who had estranged from his father in the meantime. And that was in New York in the South Bronx. He was basically to go and grow up. Now, obviously, Chris had older brothers, his twin brothers and that, and they would bully him mercifully. Unmercifully, should I say. And he says this in his own autobiographies. Constantly mocked, bullied them for his differences to them. And it was this subjective torture that drove him to the boxing gym. And that gym was the Jerome Boxing Gym in Westchester Avenue in New York City, where Chris became addicted to boxing and the boxing life, and even taking a caretaker role at the gym to pay for his dues. But it was in 1984 that Chris won his first amateur championship. And it was the tournament, the Spanish Golden Gloves. And he was also a semi-finalist in the main Golden Gloves tournament at the MSG the same year. And he made his pro debut on the 3rd of October 1985, aged 19, against Tim Brown in Atlantic City with a UD win over 4 rounds. And he fought a further 4 fights at Atlantic City, all by UD. In his first early fights in his career. Now, it was in 1987-88 that he made a move back over to UK, where he settled, and it was in Brighton. It was also a big year where he signed for Barry Hunt and Matchroom, and it was also the year that he got to fight his first fight in the United Kingdom. Under Ronnie Davis, and he went on to win his further 5 fights until he met Anthony Logan for his first title fight, and that was on the undercard with rising star Nigel Benn back in 1988. And after beating Logan, who had previously been knocked out by Nigel Benn, Eubank Senior was convinced that he could beat Nigel Benn, the middleweight Commonwealth champion at the time, and he could beat him, and he wanted to make that fight happen. He asked Barry Hunt to get him Nigel Benn, but he was a bit of a way off yet. But after another string of victories followed, and in March 1990 at York Hall, Bethnal Green, the world will see for his first title win with an 8-round knockout victory over Hugo Corti. 3 more victories defending his WBC international belt in fine style heralded the making of Benn and Eubank in November 1990 for Nigel's WBO middleweight title. A grudge match of epic proportions as their pre-fight build-up revealed the deep-rooted dislike of each other to the point of Chris refusing to look at Benn during the interviews, and of course the first of their signings of the contract. And what was to ensue was an absolute classic. Eubank started first, round 1, hitting Benn with a right cross, hoping for a surprise knockout. The opening rounds, they lacked range of jabs and any serious punches. By round 4, it started to liven up. Benn taking Eubank with an uppercut, which Chris bit his tongue so hard he could hardly talk after the fight. Brutal all the way to the 9th, when Benn's eye was closed, preventing Benn from stopping the Eubank aggression and attacks. And then finally, the referee, Richard Steele, had seen enough, and Chris Eubank became the new WBO middleweight champion. And he paid homage to Ben afterwards, as seeing the hardest fight he'd had at that time. And referee Richard Steele even said it's the most dramatic fight he'd ever refereed. And of course, Ben was the most popular of the two at that time. Chris Eubank was seen as the upstart. He was arrogant and all the rest of it. So one could forgive Chris from taking a rest, but it was the 90s, and they didn't rock that way. 3 months later, in February 1991, Chris fought unbeaten Gary Stretch, who was later to be a model and a film actor. He stopped him in 6 rounds. By June 1991, Commonwealth champion Michael Watson, who had beaten Ben previously and who'd failed to beat WBA champion Mike McCallum, was put Watson back in the fray 3 wins later for Chris's WBO belt. So on the 22nd of June 1991 at the Earls Court in London, Michael Watson, Chris Eubank was set. Watson, popular, tipped to be the first man to stop Ben. Hopefully it was by a lot of media because of his persona of being arrogant, cocky, with the cries of the media that drove public opinion back then. Everyone wanted Eubank to lose, except me. I loved his work, his entrances. I don't give a attitude. I'm simply the best. Misunderstood Eubank later revealed in his autobiography. The fight went a grueling 12 rounds. Chris winning, some say controversially, by majority decision. Moreover, the WBO called for the rematch, only to be 168 for the vacant WBO super middleweight title just 3 months later. To the day, on 21st of September 1991, they agreed on the date that would change the course of not only the two boxers' lives, but boxing worldwide itself forever. The fight was typical of the Brits in the 1990s, entertained the fans and commentators alike, as the two warriors wouldn't back down to each other, but to each other's will. Exhausted, both put their all into the fight. The 11th round came. Eubank was behind and loading up on shots, only to be put down by Watson with a right cross. That put Eubank down near the end of the round. Eubank shot back up. Instead of the referee giving Eubank a mandatory count, he allowed Eubank to carry on. And when Eubank unleashed an unmerciful uppercut that sent Watson crashing to the ropes. Watson rose to his feet when the bell sounded. Start of the 12th, and Watson clearly had not recovered. Still dazed. He only had to see out the final round, said the corner. And Eubank needed the knockout. As the round started, Chris attacked again, and the referee waved it off after it was clear Watson was defenceless. Watson collapsed in the ring, rushed to hospital. It was let known to Watson's team that there was no brain trauma unit. The delay getting Michael to another hospital caused a lack of oxygen, and to his brain, and Michael suffered irreparable trauma, leaving him paralysed and could barely communicate, both of which he had to learn to do again to a degree. I hope you all identified the changes to boxing from this point, as the sport, as back then there were no facilities, medical of any kind, at the events, and measures introduced for fighter safety worldwide were initiated. Chris would go on to defend his belt 5 times, from 1992 in Portugal, Manchester to Scotland. In 1993, a unanimous decision win over Lindell Holmes was followed by Irishman Lee Close in a split draw verdict which many felt for the Irishman in Scotland had won. That was the prelude to Ben Eubank 2. Chris had only one knockout from those 9 fights since Watson, it was evident to many he was holding back, and he was only doing enough to win his fights. Ben also had to super middleweight champion beat an Italian Mauro Garvano for the WBC version of super middleweight in Italy. Don King arranged a fight at Old Trafford, Manchester, in front of a raucous 42,000 sellout, with the promoter stipulated that both winner and loser would join his stables of fighters after the fight. They agreed, and the fight was on for unification. Jimmy Lennon Jr. introduced Chris Eubank at Old Trafford to the sound of Tina Turner's Simply the Best on the 9th of October 1993. A smiling Eubank, flanked by Barry Hunt, entered the ring to a rapturous shout of "Their ego has landed" on the commentary. The place was on fire as Nigel Benn opening bells silenced them almost instantaneously. Flanked by a large entourage of team and security, and a Frank Warren not to be outdone by his rival Barry Hunt. The ring was packed with the atmosphere, the electric, as it all began. The flexing was happening between rounds by Eubank and Benn as they soaked up the crowd and playing up to them. Eubank's enthusiasm for engaging with the crowd belied Eubank's obvious change in his boxing. He wasn't as powerful with Benn as Benn smiled and his come-to-me gestures and willingness to fight in the pocket when trade with Eubank. Benn was dominating the early rounds, and then the Eubank comeback mid-rounds, and to the point the referee made it going close into the championship rounds, taking a point off Benn, including both legends Frank Bruno and Lennox Lewis, both saying going into rounds 10, 11, 12 that Benn was ahead, and that more like the fight one than the previous 9 rounds, as both boxers exploded on one another. Both were clearly exhausted going into round 12. Benn opened up the stronger and better shots. Eubank rallied, but exhaustion prevented his shots hitting home. The round finished to scorecards of 115-113 Eubank, 115-113 Benn, and 114-114 for the split draw. Both to retain their respective belts. The trilogy never happened in their primes. Following the Benn fight, Eubank went on to defeat Graziano Rocchigiani of Germany in a split decision win over Ray Close. Eubank signed a $10 million deal with Sky Sports for fights in South Africa, Manchester, London, and Mill Street, Ireland, with 5 further title defences in Henry Wharton, Sam Story, Don Shawmer, and Amaro Costa. It was the turn of Steve Collins. On the 18th of March 1995, at the Glens Glen Arena, Mill Street, Ireland, a major upset took place when Ireland's Steve Collins, a 2-time title contender to Mike McCallum and Reggie Johnson, moved up in the weight to challenge Chris Eubank, having won the WBO middleweight title from Chris Pyatt in '94. Collins inflicted Eubank's first loss on his magnificent unbeaten record of 41-0-2. But the signs were there in Chris's previous few fights that he was there for the taking. And in truth, he was never the same fighter. He almost had a near-death after the almost near-death of Michael Watson and the life-changing injuries that he endures to this day. But by then, Sky had invested too heavily in Eubank to the point of it was all the eggs in the basket, and encouraged the extravagant entrances, pyrotechnic light shows, and the Tina Turner soundtracks were all part of the Chris Eubank experience. One Irishman's bad luck in Ray Close who was previously lined up for the trilogy, having a couple of controversial judges' decisions against him with Eubank, until an MRI scan found a brain lesion and he lost his license. WBO middleweight champion Steve Collins was drafted in, and that was this Irishman's destiny. Collins planted doubt in Eubank's head, claiming he was invincible by hypnosis, which genuinely unsettled Chris to the point of nearly calling the fight off, claiming that Collins was bewitched. The 8,000 crowd were all Collins, and when the Irishman floored Chris in the 8th round, he was on his way to becoming the 2-weight world champion, and the man who ended Chris Eubank's unbeaten run. But not without the champion Eubank showing why he was a champion himself of 2-weight divisions, with a gritty hard comeback, having Collins in all sorts of trouble in the 10th, when he floored Collins with a huge right hand that buckled the Celtic warrior, but he gathered his wits and saw out the 12 rounds. It looked to all that Collins had won. However, the fears of fans and commentators knew that Chris always got the nod in decisions, and they were ecstatic to hear the 115-11, 116-14, 114-13 scorecards. The pair met a year later, but once again, Collins would prevail. In his final 2 years in boxing, Chris Eubank challenged then up-and-coming Joe Kawasaki in a bid to retain his WBO title, with Kawasaki claiming it was the toughest fight of his career, and Eubank claiming he's a machine. It was all Kawasaki after 12 rounds. Eubank's last fights were then at the cruiserweight, today known as light heavyweight in them days. He lost to Tiger Elite Carl Thompson in the first fight by unanimous decision. It was obvious he was gone. But because they had a rematch that same year, it was done. Carl Thompson knocked out Chris Eubank. I personally was devastated. And just short of 1 month of his 32nd birthday, in July 1998, Chris Eubank's record speaks for himself as he retired. The man, the father, the boxer, the entertainer, the unpopular, the outspoken, but looking at it properly, Chris Eubank, he was brave, professional, self-educated, articulate, a complex man. With his eccentricity, gave this commentator many, many wonderful nights of boxing. He reigned supreme, undefeated his first 10 years, undefeated at middleweight. His world title contest with Ben and Watson and Collins will go down in the annals of history as the peak of British boxing. Voted one of the most recognisable celebrities in the world with his style and unmistakable aura. He was an American-made boxer with a British background. 24 title fights, 17 title defences. Out of his 52 fights, 45 wins, 23 by knockout, 5 losses, 5 draws. 5 years as a champion, spanning 3 weight divisions, a career of 13 years as a pro. He was courageous, but a genius in the ring, as this fan will describe it. To me, he was simply the best. He just wanted to be in the show. But Christopher Livingston Eubank was the show. Good night.